Hello and welcome to Learning Math with Sanchez. In case you did not know, Sanchez is my last name. Well, anyways, in this particular video, we're going to be rewriting equations and formulas. And all that means is we're going to be manipulating a variable. We're going to be solving for one variable. Now, learning this is extremely important because this is something that you will do in other classes like physics. We're going to be manipulating equations in chemistry and many other classes in math when you work in math. Well, algebra 2, of course, in geometry, you manipulate equations. What else? Well, I can keep going, pre-calculus, calculus. If you go to get to more upper level class, you're constantly trying to manipulate an equation in order to create new equations. So let's dive into these problems. We have two problems here. Now, in the first problem, it says solve the literal equation 3y plus 4x equals to 9 for y. What that means is we want to leave y alone. Well, how do we do that? What do I have to move? The question that I have to ask myself is, what do I have to move in order to leave y alone? Notice how I have this 3 here and how I have this positive 4x over here. So we need to move this 3 and this 4x to the opposite side. But the question is, how do I do that? How do I do it? Well, we still use inverse operations in order to isolate this variable. Now, the first thing that I want to move to the other side is this positive 4x. Well, and how can I move this positive 4x? Well, I can do that by subtracting from 4x from both sides. Now, when I subtract 4x from both sides, this 4x, positive 4x, and this negative 4x, they cancel each other out, and I'm left with 3y equals to 9 minus 4x. Remember that I cannot subtract 4x from 9 because they are not like terms. Take a look over here and notice how we still have that 3. Now this 3 next to the y is that it's being multiplied. Now if I want to get rid of that 3 in order to move it to the other side, I still have to use inverse operation. And the question is, well, what is the inverse operation of multiplying times 3? What is the opposite of multiplying times 3? Well, the opposite of multiplying times 3 is dividing by 3. And I am going to divide each term on the right side by 3. And I'm left with y is equal to 9 divided by 3 is positive 3. And negative 4 divided by 3, I can leave it as a fraction. And that gives me negative 4 over 3x. So there is my equation. Notice that y is isolated and is positive. That's one thing that you should be looking for. Let's take a look at this second example. Now, on this example, we are isolating, we're solving for x. In other words, we're trying to leave x alone. But take a look at this one. This is a little bit different because my first term on the right side has an x, but also my second term on the right side has an x. The only difference is that the second term has a z, the first term does not have a z. So there's something that we're going to have to do here in order to isolate x. And this is what later on you guys will learn as factoring. And it's kind of like undoing what we have. It's working backwards. And this is what I mean by that. This is what I'm going to do, and hopefully that will explain it. I need to ask myself, what does this 3x and this positive 5x times z have in common? Well, they have an x in common. They have an x in common. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out this x. I'm going to move it outside. You can also think of this as undistributing. Think of it like that. I am undistributing that x. I'm not really sure if that is even correctly a correct way to say it. But you can think of undistributing the x. So if I undistribute the x, if I take this x outside from this 3, inside this parentheses, I'm going to be left with a 3. And if I take this x from this 5x to z, if I undistribute that, I'm going to be left with a 5z. Now notice that what I have right now is a product of x times 3 plus 5z. Now take this 3 plus 5z as a whole quantity, and that's going to help us. And actually the next step that comes is fairly easy. I need to move this 3 plus 5z to the other side. I need to move all of it to the other side. And the question is the same. How do I do it? Well, I can do it by using inverse operations. Now, I'm going to mention this one more time. Notice that this 3 plus 5z is inside a parenthesis. So, because 3 plus 5z is multiplying x, the opposite of multiplying 3 plus 5z times x is dividing 3 plus 5z. And I'm going to write that in a parenthesis. So, I'm going to divide 3 plus 5z on both sides. Now, this 3 plus 5z is going to cancel out that 3 plus 5z, and I'm left with y divided by 3 plus 5z is equal to y. Sorry, not y, equal to x. And there you go. We have x isolated. We solve for x. And that is the end of our equation. Now take a look at these two check for understanding. You have to solve two problems here. Now, how can you do that? How can you solve these two problems? In both of these problems, you're going to be solving for x. So pause the video, work through these problems, and then come back once you are done. Okay, so hopefully you pause the video. I'm going to go over these problems very quickly. So let me just focus on number 1 right now. One more time, I'm trying to solve for x. So what I think about moving to the other side is 3y, and it seems that I need to move that -1. And I'm going to just write a 1 after that negative, just so I can keep in mind that that is a -1. Okay, so the inverse operations of having this positive 3y on this side is subtracting 3y. So I'm going to subtract 3y on both sides. And I am left with -1, x is equal to 9 minus 3y. And the last step is to get rid of this -1. Well, how do I do that? How do I get rid of that -1? Well, this -1 is multiplying x, so I can divide both sides by -1. And what happens when I divide? Oops, I keep writing y. What happens when I divide by -1? Well, these ones, they simplify to +1, and I am left with a positive x. 9 divided by -1 is -9. -3 divided by -1 is +3y. And that is the answer for my first question here. Let's take a look at number 2. On number 2, notice that is very similar to the second problem that we have. We're still solving for x. And in this case, we're going to have to undistribute, or how we learn later on, that's called factoring. So I'm going to factor out an x. I'm going to undistribute an x. Well, if I undistribute an x from this 2x and plus kx, then I am left with 2 plus k. Well, now that I have x times 2 plus k, and remember that all of this is one quantity because it's inside the parentheses, I can divide both sides by 2 plus k. And I'm going to write it inside the parentheses. So now this 2 plus k will cancel that one, and we are left with x is equal to y divided by 2 plus Okay, and that is our answer.